Chapter 11. Playground and Whitney Houston's Manager. I started cutting school more and more just to hang out at my favorite music store, Sam Ash, on Kings Highway and 13th Street in Brooklyn. The only other music store that I knew of was on Flatbush Avenue near Kings Plaza Mall. It was called King James Music, and it was an extremely small little mom-and-pop type place. They didn't even have enough room to set up a drum set inside. The only reason I would ever think of going there was to get an emergency pair of sticks when I ran out. One night, I had Asgard rehearsal, and I ran out of sticks. I asked my brother to drive me to King James to buy a pair. On the way out, I glanced at a bulletin board and saw a white piece of paper that said, "Drummer wanted for commercial rock band. Must be 18 years or older." At the bottom, there were about 6 or 7 little strips of white paper to rip off with the band's phone number on it. Even though it said 18 or older, and I was only 16, I figured I'd take one just to see. I really didn't think much of it. The next afternoon, I called the number and said, "Hi, I'm answering the ad you had in King James for a drummer wanted." After about 20 minutes of the guy filling me in on what the band was all about and what kind of music they were looking to do, the guy on the phone said if I was interested, I should come by his house to pick up the demo tape they'd just finished recording. I said, "Great, I'll be there tomorrow." Right before he hung up, he said, "I almost forgot to ask, how old are you?" Thinking quickly and remembering that the ad said 18 or older, I said, "I'm 18. I then asked, "By the way, what's the name of the band?" He replied, "Playground." The next day, I asked my brother to drive me to Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn, to pick up the demo. My mother also came along for the ride. I knocked on the front door of a small house in a neighborhood that had seen better days. The person that answered was a tall, skinny guy with a giant head of hair. It was the guitarist, Brendan Murphy, whom I'd been speaking with. He gestured me inside and I obliged. I was glad to see that Brendan's image was along the lines of what I was looking for. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, image was very important. The main reason it was important to me was that it told me right away that someone was serious about being in a band. I'd already played with so many people that just wouldn't commit full time. Everyone always had an excuse about why they didn't have their hair long or look like a rocker. "My job won't let me," or "My girlfriend doesn't like my hair long." Meanwhile, I almost got kicked out of grammar school and high school because my hair was long. As crazy as it sounds, Brendan's image immediately told me that he was serious. After a brief conversation, he gave me Playground's 3-song demo, which included the songs Could Have Been You, Heaven in Her Eyes, and Third Heart. I told Brendan I'd be in touch after listening to the tape. After I left, I realized he never brought up the age question again. I guess I passed for 18. As soon as I got back home, I put the tape in my stereo and gave it a listen. The quality wasn't that great, but there was something about the songs that I liked. It wasn't as polished as the Seventh Heaven demo that I had just gotten, but I liked it. I could tell right away why they parted ways with their old drummer. He wasn't very good. This could be very promising, I thought to myself. Even though I was barely 16, I was at the point where I was auditioning bands rather than them auditioning me. I called Brendan the next day and told him I liked the demo and I'd love to come down to jam. Playground set up my audition at a familiar place, Sync the Pink Studios. I hadn't met the rest of the band yet, but I was hoping they had the same type of image as Brendan. Playground rented the big room for the audition, a good first sign in my book. When I got into the room, I met the other 2 members, guitarist Steve Karasotis and singer Tommy Snyder. Steve had short hair, but he had a cool image. Tommy looked like a typical rock singer at the time. He had long curly hair, probably a perm, and a black leather jacket with fringes. I thought to myself, perfect. Before we even started playing, I remember thinking to myself, if these guys are just even okay, I think it can become something pretty special. They had cool songs, the right look, and so far the right attitude. As soon as we kicked into the first song, It Could Have Been You, something just felt right. I don't know how to explain it, but every once in a while you come across people that you just gel with. Something felt comfortable and familiar as we were playing. Not only musically, but the energy in the room just felt right. Over the years, I've always had a saying These are my kind of people, or these aren't my kind of people. There are just certain people that I gel with musically and personally, and I think Playground was the first band where both happened. After the audition, they asked me to join right on the spot, and I gladly accepted. Playground was formed. Playground was Tommy Snyder, vocals, Brendan Murphy, guitar, Steve Karasotis, guitar, Joey Cassata on drums. We began to rehearse non-stop at Redline Studios in Staten Island. It was a magnificent room, almost like a giant airport hangar. It had a giant stage and the drums sounded massive, almost like Eric Carr's on Creatures of the Night. Not only were we rehearsing at least 2 nights a week, but I also began hanging out with the guys in the band on the other nights. We would go out to bars in Bay Ridge or in my old neighborhood Marine Park in Brooklyn. Flatbush Avenue in Marine Park was a great hangout and always packed with people. Even though I was only 16 years old, my grammar school friends and I had been hanging out there for over a year now. The bars weren't strict about asking for ID. We regularly visited a place called the Cuckoo's Nest, a perfect fit for us. Rehearsals were going great, but out on Flatbush Avenue was where we really started to bond as a band. The singer Tommy was a complete nut and had a big group of friends that I would always meet at the bar. I got along great with one of Tommy's friends in particular, Ernie Lamont. He was a short little guy with glasses, had a high-pitched voice and a lisp, kind of like this. He was funny as could be. Ernie would also come to rehearsals because he absolutely loved the band and prided himself on knowing everything there was to know about music. After a month of vigorous rehearsals, things were going as well as they could, at least until I received a call from Brendan telling me that the band was over. I was in shock and anxiously said, "What? How could this be? Things were going so good. What happened?" Brendan went on to tell me that things just weren't working out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I thought I'd finally found a band that not only had the same drive and passion as I had, but these were people who I genuinely liked. I was pretty upset. No more than 5 minutes went by when my phone rang again. It was our singer, Tommy Snyder. I asked, "What the hell happened, Tommy?" He replied very nonchalantly, "What do you mean?" I went on to explain that Brendan had just called and said that the band was over. He began laughing and I heard him yell to someone in the background, "Yeah, he called Joey too, and he told him that the band was over." He proceeded to tell me that the band was not over and that Brendan had a meltdown and quit. I guess Brendan was so egotistical that he assumed if he quit, then the band would be over. Tommy said, "Not only is the band continuing, but we want to do so with just Steve on guitar, and we already set up an audition for a bass player later that week." I took a deep breath to process all the information Tommy had just given me. He asked, "Are you still in?" I said, "Absolutely." Steve knew another guitar player named Dave Robow, who said he knew a bass player looking for a band. Crazy, but that's how things worked back then. Word of mouth. A friend of a friend of a friend would introduce you to someone. There weren't that many bands and musicians in the neighborhood, and somehow they all knew each other. Dave set up an audition for the bass player in the garage of the drummer he'd been playing with, Rocky Marola. This would be the first time we were playing without Brendan. Nobody was sure how it would sound with only one guitarist. Before the bass player arrived, we jammed a little to warm up, and we quickly realized that we didn't need the second guitar player at all. Over the years, I actually have come to dislike playing with 2 guitarists in one band. Unless done perfectly, it can become very messy and noisy. Most guitar players play way too loud, and their sound is usually pretty crappy. Multiply that by 2, and it becomes a major problem. Playground's first rehearsal as a 3-piece felt right. After a few songs, the bass player arrived and introduced himself. His name was Brian DeVito. My first impression was that he looked like a rocker, which was a great sign. Brian received the same 3-song demo that I did to learn for the audition. Up until this point, I hadn't played any of these Playground songs with the bass player, and I immediately felt the difference as soon as we hit the first note. Not only was the guitar clear, but the songs now had a bottom that I could lock onto. We had found our bass player. Over the course of the next few weeks, we decided that we needed to start playing live. We knew we could only get so good rehearsing in the studio night after night, and that we had to test out these songs in front of a live audience. Besides me, no one else in the band ever played a live gig before. Even though I had played the Battle of the Bands, I was also very new to gigging. We had no idea how to even go about getting a show. The band would get together and have meetings about how to book shows. The only thing we could think of was to get one of the local music papers and start cold calling every club we could find. And that's exactly what we did. We must have called 2 or 3 dozen places looking for a gig. It was basically the same conversation every time. It went something like this. "Hello, my name is Joey Cassata from the band Playground. We were wondering if you had any open dates that you needed a band for." The club owner's response would go something like this. "Do you guys have a following? How many people did you draw the last time you played?" I would then respond, "We are a new band and this would actually be our first gig, but I think we would get a lot of people to come to the show." The club owner would usually end the call right there. "Call us back when you have a following," and he'd hang up. Looking back, we were so innocent and naive that we always told the truth about this being our first gig. Even the terms they were using were completely foreign to us. What the hell did a following mean? Was he asking if we had fans? How the hell could we have fans if we've never played before? Not one club owner would ever ask us about our music or to hear a demo tape. It was always about bringing people. This was extremely frustrating to us because it was a catch-22. How could we have fans if we've never played? But no one would give us a show unless we brought fans. Again, we were so young and dumb that we didn't even think of considering all of our friends as fans. All my friends had been dying to see me play live since I started playing drums. I'm sure the other guys in the band had plenty of friends too that would come. We just never even thought of mentioning it. After about a week of doing this, we started to lose all hope. Until one day, Steve and I cold called a place called Billy O's out in Staten Island. We had tried all the Brooklyn and Manhattan clubs, and unfortunately no one wanted any part of us. We were skeptical about booking a show in Staten Island. Not only was it far away, but there was no public transportation. None of my friends even drove yet, since we were all too young. It didn't matter. We were desperate, and we had to give it a shot. Steve started talking to the manager, and I heard most of the same questions being answered. After a few minutes, I'd lost all hope, but then Steve said, "Hold on." Then he cupped his hand over the phone. "He wants to know if we're available August 4th. I couldn't believe it. I shouted, a little overzealous, "Of course we're available!" Steve got back on and said, "Great, we'll take it." As soon as he hung up, we started to hug like we just won the Super Bowl. We had finally secured our first gig. I immediately asked Steve what the details were. He said the guy told us to stop by and see the place and that we needed to get another band to play with us that same night. Truth was, we didn't know any other bands, but that didn't matter. We would figure it out. First, we had to call and let the other guys know that in under 2 months, Playground had its first show. We excitedly called Tommy to tell him the great news, but when he answered, he was already excited about something else. Before we could tell him the news about booking our first show, he started rambling a mile a minute, something about a big opportunity for us and Whitney Houston's manager. Steve and I looked at each other like he was nuts. We would all see each other at rehearsal later that night and decided we would discuss everything then. We didn't even get a chance to tell him about the show. Playground was now rehearsing at Rockaway Studios in Rockaway, Queens. It was a brand new studio that just opened. Usually our bass player Brian DeVito, who we just called DeVito, would pick me up at my house and Steve and Tommy would go together. On this particular night, we went an hour before our rehearsal time so we could discuss all the band business. We filled Tommy and DeVito in about our first show at Billy O's in Staten Island come August. They were excited and had a lot of questions, but first Steve and I had to know what the hell Tommy was talking about on the phone earlier that day. We told him, talk slow and start from the beginning. He explained to us that there was a talent competition in Starrett City where he lived, and they were looking for a band to perform. It was going to be broadcast on local public access TV, and Whitney Houston's manager was going to be one of the judges. Now, I have no idea why, but this news was very exciting to all of us. We thought, wow, not only are we going to be on TV, but Whitney Houston's manager is going to watch us perform. Looking back, of course, this was absolutely ridiculous. But at the time, Whitney Houston was one of the biggest names in music, and this would be our first brush with someone who worked in the music industry. Tommy then told us that we wouldn't be performing live and that they wanted us to lip sync to our recording. We all knew there was a big problem with that last bit of info. The demo tape they had given me to audition with was definitely not good enough for a performance of this magnitude, and we knew immediately that we needed to make a new demo. This was sometime in mid-May of 1990, and the public access TV talent competition was going to be at the end of June. That only gave us 1 month to record and rehearse. We decided we would only need to do one song, and that it would be Third Heart. It was our most mainstream song and had a great hook in the chorus. Looking back, this was madness. It was so cost prohibitive back in the early 90s to record just one song. We would need to book a professional recording studio on an hourly basis. The most time-consuming part of recording can be getting sounds for each instrument and then the mixing after. It would have been much smarter to record 3 to 6 songs, but again, we were naive and young. Besides, Whitney Houston's manager was going to love us, and hopefully we wouldn't need to record another demo. I actually missed that innocence. It was so exciting thinking everything you did was great, to never second-guess yourself and be willing to do anything. These early playground years were some of the best moments in my musical career because of that bright-eyed, innocent attitude. We found a recording studio out in Staten Island called Laughing Dog Studios, but we wanted to go check it out in person before we booked it. When we arrived, the first and only person we met was the owner-engineer, Dan. Because we were obviously young, Dan didn't treat us with any respect. He knew we didn't know much about recording, and he tried to act like a big-shot engineer. The drum kit in the studio was a small 5-piece Yamaha kit. I was used to playing on my big kit, but more importantly, the song that we were recording had some cool tom fills for which I needed my high toms. I told Dan that I wanted to bring in my own kit, but he wanted no part of it, basically telling me, "No, the Yamaha kit here is top of the line, and I know how to get a good sound with it. I don't want to be messing around with some crappy kit of yours." Again, we were so naive that I just said, "Okay." If a producer-engineer ever tried to pull that on me today, they would have a big problem. Even though we didn't really like Dan the engineer, and I wasn't thrilled about using a different kit, we really had no choice. We had to have a song recorded to perform in front of Whitney Houston's manager. So we booked Laughing Dog Studios for the following weekend. When I got home from Staten Island, I decided to call Dan and insist that I at least bring my rototoms to the recording session. Rototoms were 3 high-pitched toms that were on one single stand. I wasn't taking no for an answer. Dan wasn't happy and reluctantly agreed. We rehearsed the song like madmen that week. We must have played it 100 times to make sure it was perfect. Even though I had a little experience recording in school, and the rest of the guys had experience recording their first demo, we were still very new to the recording process. For everyone reading this that doesn't know how most recordings are done, I'll offer a quick explanation. Usually, every instrument is recorded separately. The benefit of this is that if things get messed up, only one part has to be recorded again. There's also no bleeding of other instruments on each other's microphones. If you were to record live, where all instruments are recorded simultaneously, the band would have to be prepared to start from scratch when someone made even the smallest mistake. This was way before there was digital recording where it's easy to punch in at any desired spot. This was all analog and reel-to-reel or DAT. Drums are the first instrument to be recorded because once the drums are recorded, everyone else can just follow and align together with that part. The drummer wouldn't have to play the song alone, of course, just be alone in the actual recording room. The other members of the band could be in the control room with their instruments plugged in directly to the mixing board. They would just record a basic scratch track while the drummer works in the sound room recording his actual take. The drummer's main job is to keep time for the band. To help the drummer lock into a specific tempo, which is the speed of the song, sometimes a click track is used. A click track is just what it sounds like, a clicking noise that the drummer plays along with, set to the tempo of the song. I'd played with a click track a few times up until this point, and I never really loved it. Playground did not rehearse this song to a click track, nor did we even set a tempo for a click track. So obviously, going into the studio, I assumed we were not recording to a click track. As soon as we were ready to try the first take, Dan said, "Okay, what's the tempo so I can set the click track?" I said in the talkback mic, "We aren't using a click." Dan, thinking he knew everything there was to know about recording, replied angrily, "You have to use a click track. Otherwise, it will be too hard to mix the song later." Like fools, once again, we gave in because we figured Dan, the engineer and owner of his own recording studio, knew what he was talking about. Steve happened to have a copy of the old Third Heart demo. Dan played it for a few seconds in the control room and set the click track tempo to the old recording. We were now ready to record, even though we had never rehearsed it to the click track, and didn't even know if we wanted it to be the same tempo as the old demo. Even with all these uncertainties, we were about to begin. God help us. As soon as we started, I knew something was wrong. The beginning of the song started with big hits with drum fills in between. This is where I needed the rototoms that Dan was so against. Immediately, the tempo felt way too fast. Then, once the hits were over and we entered the musical intro of the chorus, I recognized immediately what was wrong and stopped playing. I signaled into the control room and told them that the song has various tempo changes, including the whole beginning. Unless we were going to take out an hour or two to actually map out every tempo change, we needed to scrap the click track and just get on with it. Most of the other guys in the band barely understood what I was even talking about, and Dan looked pissed that we wouldn't have his click track to edit with later. I didn't care what Dan wanted. This was our money, and I wasn't wasting a few hours to set up a new click track. After 2 takes, my job was finished. I laid down a pretty decent drum track. I wasn't happy with the sound of the drums, but moron Dan the engineer assured me that he would make the sound huge when we mixed. Again, I foolishly listened to him. As much as I relished every moment during these early stages of my music career, I was still savvy enough to absorb every lesson I was learning along the way. I would never again let a producer or engineer tell me that the drum sound was going to be fixed in the mix. And sure enough, almost every one of them tried that same trick with me for many years to come. After many more mishaps for the other members of the band, the recording of the Playground Third Heart demo was finally finished in early June of 1990. One of the cool things I'm going to get to do with this audiobook is include some of the demos and songs from my early bands. Here's my very first recording with Playground, Third Heart.
Now that your love is gone, did it die in vain? Something to say, put your tan away. lost and cannot be saved. I know you care, your eyes deceive you. You say you don't, but your heart will believe you. Now things have changed, you're not the same. But who's to say? Tell me who's to blame. Tell me who's to blame. You're just not the same. Third eye now lives where the angels fly. Cry like a child for a love that has died.
We now had a few weeks to rehearse for our big TV debut. We thought we needed a few synchronized, choreographed moves to make our performance really look professional. We rehearsed our moves at least 3 times a week at Tommy's apartment in Starrett City. I would sit on the back of the couch so it looked like I was on a drum riser, while the other members of the band would practice their spins and dropping to their knees in unison. It felt like I was back in 6th grade again, putting on concerts for the girls in Jason Pierce's basement. Only this time, it was for real. Sort of. Our friend Dave even got us into the Jewish Center in Brooklyn, where his father worked, so that we could use their big stage for rehearsal. Looking back, the whole thing was absolutely ludicrous. We didn't need to rehearse 3 little moves over and over again. Never mind that, I wasn't even part of these moves, and I still came to air drum behind the other guys while they did their moves. Again, I say, innocence is bliss. I never even gave it a second thought. Of course I wanted to be there. This was, after all, my band, and we were getting ready as a team for the biggest event any of us had ever been a part of. I loved every second of those long nights in the Jewish Center air drumming in front of my bandmates, while they practiced 3 silly choreographed moves. We were bonding as a band and as friends. It was a priceless time that I wouldn't have traded for the world. We were now a week away from our big performance, and I realized a horrifying thing. I had tickets to see Kiss at Nassau Coliseum in Long Island the same night we were doing the public access TV performance. I was crushed. Kiss was currently on their Hot in the Shade tour, and I really didn't want to miss it. But just like when I had my very first gig at Battle of the Bands and I had to miss my 8th grade graduation dance, I would now have to sacrifice something else. This time, it was Kiss. I knew this was a sign of things to come. To be in a successful band or successful at anything in life, a person must sacrifice a big part of his personal life, and I totally understood. After weeks of rehearsing our lip-sync performance and the disaster that was our recording session, it was finally time to perform in front of Whitney Houston's manager. On the morning of the performance, Tommy called us in a panic and told us that our time slot had been moved up to the evening instead of our original 8 p.m. start. The other guys were upset, but I couldn't have been happier. This meant I would be able to go see Kiss after all. Once we arrived at the Starrett City TV studio, we set up our equipment in a pretty small room, much smaller than the giant stage we had been rehearsing on at the Jewish Center. Once set up, we asked them to play back the demo so that we could hear it and test our playing along to it. Even though we were lip-syncing, I still would have to hit my cymbals to show them moving. Otherwise, it would look completely fake. We tested it for a few seconds and quickly realized we had a big problem. We couldn't hear the track over the loud crashing of my cymbals. The producer of the public access show told me to just pretend to hit them. Once again, a moron producer was telling me the wrong thing to make their life easier. I had seen enough videos in my day to know that nobody ever faked hitting the cymbals. I would have looked ridiculous. And to quote Jake Waltz, the head of the film studio in the movie The Godfather, "A man in my position can't afford to be made to look ridiculous." I knew I needed to somehow mute the cymbals. Sometimes I would mute my drums using duct tape on the skins and thought maybe that would work on the cymbals. I asked one of the workers in the studio for some tape and began to apply them to the bottom of my cymbals so it wasn't visible on camera. It worked like a charm. I would use this exact method many times over my career. We were now ready to go. From where we were in the studio, we couldn't see any of the judges or the other contestants. We just knew Whitney Houston's manager was probably right behind the door getting ready to watch us perform for the first time as a band. I think Steve DeVito and especially Tommy were really nervous. I wasn't at all. If anything, an easy calm came over me right before we started. Probably because the place I felt most like myself was on stage behind my drums, performing and doing what I was born to do. The host of the show came out to introduce us on camera. He was an elderly gentleman who looked a bit like Elvis. He held his mic and said, "Up next, we have an up-and-coming band called Playground." Now that was all fine for an introduction, but what he said next for some reason made me start laughing hysterically right as we went on. He looked directly into the camera and said, "Go for it." I'm not sure why this was so funny to me. Maybe because it was a line out of Rocky, or maybe it was just the way he said it. Luckily, the song had a keyboard intro, and I had a few seconds to compose myself. You can actually still see me laughing at the beginning of the video that's on YouTube. The performance was going great. One of the big choreographed moves was coming up, the synchronized drop to the knees. All the times that we'd practiced this particular move, the guys had never actually gotten it perfectly in sync. I watched from behind my kit until finally they nailed it. Everyone dropped in perfect synchronization. I was so proud. They delivered for the first time and in our biggest moment. It was all easy sailing from then on. We finished the song and we were thrilled. All the hard work had paid off. We just put on an amazing performance on TV, well, public access, and in front of one of the industry's biggest managers. But I couldn't stay to celebrate with my new band because I had to rush to get to the Kiss concert. I didn't even stick around to hear any feedback. As I was carrying out my drums and rushing to the parking lot, I passed the waiting area. The one thing that caught my eye was the fact that the room was filled with little kids. A little girl in a tutu, a group of kids dressed as rappers, you name it. I really didn't think anything of it at the time because I was still so high from our great performance, and now I was on my way to go see Kiss. The Kiss concert at Nassau Coliseum was extra special that night. I was seeing my favorite band after just having played a great show that could possibly break my band into the big time. The only thing I could think of while watching was I wanted to be up there on that stage with them. I could see it in my head. Playground, Kiss, World Tour. I slept extra sound that night knowing I was on the right path to making my dreams come true. The next morning I was expecting to hear from one of the guys but woke up to nothing. I called Steve to find out all of the details. First, I wanted to know what Whitney Houston's manager thought of us. Second, I wanted to know if we won the talent show. Steve's tone immediately smelled of bad news. He asked, "Do you want the good news or the bad news?" My answer to that question is always bad news first. He told me that Whitney Houston's manager was never there, and he's not sure if he was even supposed to be there. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All of the work, time, and money we spent on the demo was to impress Whitney Houston's manager, and there was a chance he was never even supposed to be there. I asked Steve, "Then who were the judges?" And he replied, "That's part 2 of the bad news. There really were no judges." I was furious. "Then how did they pick a winner? At least tell me that was the good news. We won?" Steve told me There was no winner. It was more like a kids' talent show, and they didn't want to make any of the kids feel bad, so they didn't even choose a winner. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I reluctantly followed up with, "Then what's the good news?" Steve said, "The good news is that they are going to air our performance on TV in a few weeks, and they are sending us a copy. So at least we will have a cool video of us playing." I couldn't help but to start laughing. This was one of many lessons I'd learned in the music business. Sometimes working hard and killing yourself to do something isn't the most important thing. You, meaning yourself, not a manager, not some other guy in the band, not a friend of a friend, but you must make sure all of the back-end details are solid before thrusting into any endeavor. I was still far from jaded, but this was definitely not an event I would be forgetting anytime soon. On the bright side, I still have that great video of us lip-syncing Third Heart on public access TV with the amazing "Go For It" intro. The whole Whitney Houston's manager story actually makes the video even more enjoyable.